if you don't have a physical Bible with you, sorry, I keep hitting the table, like this is mine, then have a browser window open, and so you can have this part, the video on one side of the screen with the chat, and then your Bible open on the other side of the screen when we're reading. And then you obviously have all submitted your assignments digitally, so you should have a digital copy of that you also should have open to take notes. If you are here live, if you are watching this video later, then you would definitely want to be doing that as you're listening to the different questions and as we go over them. In about a minute, we're going to start. So I think only Lex and Eva might be here live, but people might join in later. That's what happened with the senior girls. But regardless, you're going to need this video to go over your questions. And so you can watch it later at your own pace. So I'll give us one more minute. There's my husband's artwork behind me, by the way. There's a cartoon on the wall. I get antsy just like you guys. All right, so if you are just now coming in or tuning in, I am going to give some instructions for this video. This is to supplement with the Ruth assignment that you guys turned in this morning at 9 o'clock. Pretty much all of your assignments will be due at 9 a.m. since that is when our class, in-person class, would end, typically when we'd finish things. So as long as you submit those assignments by the due date, which is whatever the date is, and by 9 a.m., they are considered on time. Think of it as a digital initial, like I would come around and make sure you actually did it. I go over those assignments before we do this video to make sure that you actually did answer the questions. And then if you had trouble on a question or two, just like normal, that's totally okay. You just got to do your best. And then we will go over them together. So some of these will be live streams like this. Boundaries in dating, when we go over that, we might do that in a Zoom call. It depends on how it works. So if people want to join, then we'll be more interactive. And obviously, the more that you're able to participate, that will be part of your PABE score too. Joining in for the live streams is not a requirement, but there is an opportunity for extra credit with consistency in doing so. So that is a little bit of what we're going to do. Once you are done taking notes for this video, for the Ruth video, for other videos, then the submission due date on Schoology will be changed to a certain time. You will have at least 24 hours, if not more, to update your notes and then resubmit them to Schoology with a new due date so that they are on time still for full credit. So that's how it's going to work. If you guys have any questions, then you can email me. I think there's a comment section. I don't know how to do this live stream thing. I always hear people say that, so I'm assuming that's a thing. Or you can obviously write it in the update section on Schoology too. So we're going to get started. All right, we are going over the class notes questions on Ruth. Again, I said have your Bible open. If you don't have a hard copy Bible, have a browser window open with Ruth chapter 1. Ruth is in the Old Testament. It is right after the book of Judges, and I think, let me make sure I'm saying this correctly. Yeah, right after the book of Judges and right before the book of 1 Samuel. It is a very short book. Normally, I would ask you guys how many chapters it is. It is 4 chapters. It is very short, so we definitely are going to finish that this year. Even with this distance learning platform, it should be okay and easy to go over together. So, the first question, before we talk about Ruth and get into it, I'm actually just going to read the chapter out loud. So I did have you girls do that at the end of the assignment. It was an introduction to the book of Ruth and then also to the first chapter. So we are going to talk about Ruth and who she is, but first we're actually going to just read how the scriptures introduce her on their own. So I'm just going to read this out loud. Now it came about in the days when the judges governed that there was a famine in the land. And a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the land of Moab with his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. Now we have right here a virtual whiteboard, I guess you could say. So when I would write stuff on the board, like how to spell things, that is what this is for. I'm not going to write down every single thing that you need to take notes on this piece of paper, just like in class. So make sure you are paying attention and adding notes as we go along together. There's a couple different ways of spelling these names, but we'll write them all out right now. So we have this person's name, Naomi. Obviously, we have Ruth. Naomi's husband was named, I'm going to make sure I got to spell this right, Elimelech. And then they had 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. Chilion's name is spelled a couple different ways depending on your translation. I am using the NASB. Normally in class they use the ESV, but this is what I have right now. That's a bigger Bible. I believe that I'm probably going to be spelling it this way, but it's the same. This looks like it says Chilion. That's not usually correct. It's Chilion. But this is another way of spelling his name. So Ruth has a husband, Mahlon, and then her sister-in-law, Orpah, who we are about to be introduced to. Or I guess we just did. Orpah, not Oprah. There's a fun little story about that, actually. I don't know if it's a wives' tale, but I think Oprah said it herself, that she was supposed to be named Orpah after this story in Ruth, and on the birth certificate, they wrote her name wrong. They wrote it Oprah. So if you write it, I used to say, if you write it on the test, you're going to be marked down. It is Orpah, not Oprah. So make sure you spell it out. And then Orpah's husband was Chilion. So that is how we start the book. So Elimelech, after this happened, so they went to, the name of the man was Elimelech, the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem in Judah. They entered the land of Moab and remained there. Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They took for themselves Moabite women as wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. And they lived there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and the woman was bereft of her 2 children and her husband. Yikes. Super sad. So it seems like Naomi's sons actually married their wives after their father had passed away. All of these people right here, these were all of Jewish heritage. So they were in the kingdom of Israel, specifically the land of Judah, specifically the city of Bethlehem. There was a famine in the land. Things were not going well for the people at the time. There was a lot of disobedience. This is a question you guys answer later, but it was the time of the book of Judges. And so judges were ruling the land. There was no king yet in Israel. So they have to they decide to go to the land of Moab where there is food. While they're there for a while, their father dies, Elimelech dies, and then the 2 men are growing up, and then they take 2 Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah, to be their wives. So it says that they stayed there 10 years. And then Mahlon and Chilion also died. So then these guys, they're dead. So now we just got these 3 women. And what happens? Then she, being Naomi, arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the land of Moab, for she had heard in the land of Moab that the Lord had visited his people, giving them food. So that's saying, okay, I guess Israel, the people in Judah, are not going through a famine anymore. Seems like things are okay. There's nothing really for us in Moab anymore. Okay, maybe I'll go back. She departed from the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return to Judah. So they're on the path to go. They're going back to Judah because the famine has been lifted. All of their husbands have died. They're like, I guess we'll just go back. But then on the way there, Naomi seems to have some type of realization. Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead," being their husbands, "and with me. May the Lord grant that you may find rest each in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. I mean, this is their mother-in-law. They're living with her for 10 years. They're obviously probably very close. And they said to her, "No, but we will surely return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may be your husbands?" Weird phrase, but essentially implying like, okay, it's not like I'm pregnant right now and then I can give birth and then you can marry my other son, which would happen in Jewish families because the families needed to stay together, to be protected, to have financial security. That's just something that they did, so that no family member would kind of be left on their own. She's saying, I'm not pregnant. I don't even have a husband, so I couldn't do that for you. Return my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I said I have hope, if I should even have a husband tonight and also bear sons, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is harder for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. So again, she's reiterating the fact that even if she was pregnant tonight, it's not like they're going to wait around for the baby in her womb to grow up so they can marry them. Also weird, even then. Would be kind of weird. So she's saying, hey, I have a bad lot in life. I'm old. I probably can't get married again. You guys are young. Keep in mind that in the Jewish culture at this time, it was not uncommon for girls to get married super young to us. So like 14, 15, 16, 17, like prime ages to get married. So even if they were married for 10 years, so like say on the, older end of that spectrum, 17, 18, married to their husbands for 10 years, 27, 28, that is still very young to be a widow. Like that would be really hard. And so she's saying, you guys are young enough, you can get married again, you can have a family and then provide for yourselves with the family. She's saying, I got nothing. My husband's dead, my sons are dead, no one's here to take care of me. You don't have an obligation to take care of me because I don't have sons for you anymore. And the men at the time were protectors and providers and kept the family unit together. So she's urging them to go back to their family land in Moab. So then, verse 14, they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So the phrase Orpah kissed her mother-in-law is implying that she kissed her goodbye and then she left, but Ruth did not. Ruth clung to her. So verse 15, then she said, behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. Like, hey, she's going to her people, which are the same as your people, essentially. You came from the same land. Go. Why are you staying here? But verse 16, Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. When she saw, she being Naomi, that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. So those phrases right there actually might be kind of familiar to you. There's a worship song, I think, that says something like, where you go, I'll go, where you stay, I stay. That's from the book of Ruth. That's from here. And it talks about loyalty. And we'll talk about that in a bit. Just checking in, since we're almost done with chapter 1, I just want to make sure that you guys are still there. So if you are still in the live stream, if you could just type in the chat box that you are here so I can see who is still around, that'd be really helpful for me. And I don't know if I didn't say this at the beginning of the video, I apologize. If you have questions live, please type them in the text box. I will see, obviously there's a lag, but I will still see them and I will address them in real time as we're going over the chapter and the questions. So please feel free to do that as much as you can. Okay. So after Naomi realizes, all right, Ruth is not leaving. She is staying with me. She has decided to follow the God of Israel like I do. She is putting her trust in him. She's saying that this is what she's going to do. All right, I'm not going to push her away. So verse 18, they both went until they came to Bethlehem. And when they had come to Bethlehem, all the city was stirred because of them. And the woman said, is this Naomi? So Naomi and her family have been gone for a long time. So when they see her, they're like, oh my gosh, like, this is Naomi. She's been gone for 10 years or more. And they greeted her. And verse 20, she said, she being Naomi, said to them, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has witnessed against me and the Almighty has afflicted me? So Naomi's name, and I'm going to do what I do on the board, which is, lots of arrows and writing and stuff. So Naomi here. Her name originally, I believe, means pleasant or like sweetness, something like that. I believe it's pleasantness. So she's saying, you know what? No, don't call me that. My life has not been pleasant and sweet anymore. So she asks them to call her Mara, which means bitter, because she believes my life is super bitter now. Things are not going well for me. I don't like how this is going, and don't call me sweet. Call me bitter, because that's how I feel. So After that, verse 22, Naomi did return, and with her Ruth, and with her Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, and they returned from the land of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. So there's going to be food, they're going to be okay, but Naomi is still not in good spirits, even though Ruth did actually stay with her. So that is how chapter 1 starts, and now that we have an introduction to all the characters, which I believe was the first question I asked you guys on your assignment, we are going to go over that together. So here we go. All right, I have not heard from you guys, so I'm checking to see if you're still in there. Maybe not, but that's okay. All right. Oh, here we go. So question number 1 is, who was Ruth? Give a brief description of her, including her heritage, where she came from and lived, what her situation was, who she was a daughter of, and any other interesting facts you may find. So you guys did a good job with this. There's some things, obviously, we get introduced to her in the beginning of the chapter about that she was a Moabitess, which means that she was from the land of Moab. It is not a Jewish nation. It's actually a pagan nation. They worshiped other gods. They were actually not even necessarily monotheistic. So this is a term that you're going to want to write on your notes. Monotheistic means that you believe in one God, and belief in many gods is polytheistic. So mono means one. You probably knew that. Poly means many. So these are things you're going to need in your notes. I hope that you guys can see. It's probably similar to the board in school. So Ruth becomes the wife to a Jewish man. So she's immersed in this, learning about the God of Israel, this God who cares, this one God who provides for his people and loves his people and forgives his people and is not about just being appeased constantly by works and sacrifices, but says, I care more about your heart. So she's learning about this, and she decides to become Jewish with this family as she grows up and is getting older and becoming a woman. So she was a Moabitess. She came in from and lived in Moab, married an Israelite family who had traveled to Moab to find shelter during the time of famine in Israel, like we just talked about. So she wasn't born Jewish, she did convert. Her husband died early on in their marriage when she was quite young. She not only lost her husband then, but her brother-in-law as well. It appears she never knew her father-in-law, but that he had passed before she married her sons. So here are some fun facts that if you are watching this video, you are going to need to add to number 1 to get full credit. First, she is the great grandmother of a very special person. If you guys were alive, I would be asking you who this is. This is the King David, who eventually becomes king later once Israel starts having kings. And King David is in the direct lineage of Jesus. So Ruth is in the heritage line of Jesus, which is pretty dang cool considering that she was not even born Jewish. But obviously, as we've talked about, that's what God does with people. So she's essentially Jesus's great-great-grandmother. We talked about her being of a pagan background. Most pagans aren't open to the idea necessarily of a Hebrew God Yahweh or a monotheistic worldview. And so that was another thing that was interesting, is that was her background. She was the daughter of King Eglon. I will write down his name. This guy, there's an interesting story about him, I believe, in 1 Samuel. His death was not pleasant. If you're curious, I can give you that passage. But yeah, so he was king of Moab at the time. So when Naomi, it gives some context too to Naomi urging her daughter-in-law to go back to her people. Her people was this guy and all of his relatives. So they're actually technically royalty, which is an interesting fact. Without a husband, women didn't have many rights in society either, like we've mentioned. So staying with Naomi, like Ruth's decision to stay with Naomi was like, I don't know, financially a really bad call. It was not super wise pragmatically for her to do that. It had completely to do with her faith in God and her love for God and Naomi. So it is interesting thing to know about this book that it is a love story. It's known as a love story. You might have heard of Ruth and another name that we'll get to later in the book. But it also is a love story between Ruth and Naomi and her love for her mother-in-law and her loyalty to her, and because she is family at this point. So we'll talk about that. Okay, so number 2, what does Ruth's name mean? Her name means friend or companion. I asked you guys how this meaning of her name might relate to the significance of the story. So Some things that you girls had said is that, yeah, she remains a faithful, loyal companion to Naomi, even when it doesn't like make sense for her. If she were thinking only about herself and what she'd be getting out of it, she would not have stayed with Naomi. That would have been a bad idea to do that. But because of her faith in God's provision for her and having, Naomi probably, again, was a huge instrumental thing in her coming to faith in the Jewish God. So she probably does have a connection to her in that way spiritually as well. Even though right now when we're introduced to Naomi in the story, she's obviously having a very hard time. So then Ruth becomes a companion also to her husband, Mahlon, and their relationship. Then when she becomes a widow, she stays to Naomi. They help and care for each other right when they're going back to Bethlehem. And Ruth didn't seek love, but rather was selfless. She knew that if she stayed with Naomi, it would not go well, that she would probably have to sacrifice some comforts of life. But she wanted to show that love to her too. Probably a love that she felt from God herself. All right, so those are some fun facts about Ruth. And that is for number 2. I think that's number 2. Yeah. Or I'm sorry, not fun facts. That is about what Ruth's name means. And that is friend or companion. And she obviously is being that to Naomi. Number 3, who do some Bible scholars attribute the authorship of Ruth to? Which means who do they probably believe wrote the book? And that is Samuel, the prophet Samuel, which is the book of 1 Samuel is directly after this, but this is when Samuel was a prophet, and so they attribute it to his writings. He may have wrote it anytime between the 6th or 4th century, and obviously since it's BC, we say 6th to 4th. That sounds so weird because normally we say 4th to 6th because we go up, but with BC, later years go down in number. And so other dates like 1375 to 1050 BC, that's like a big chunk of years, but that's probably mostly accurate. It was written after David became king. David was king after Saul. We've talked about some of that. I know it's a lot to keep track of sometimes, but it was written after David became king. So that's how we help to date that too. So that is number 3. Number 4, what was the political climate like during the book of Ruth for the Jewish people? So I kind of mentioned this in the beginning. They did not have a king. They did have a prophet. Things like this. They had the judges. The judges were there set by God to try to keep Israel in line. It didn't work too great. They would have that cycle that we've talked about in Habakkuk of them repenting and coming to God and then kind of doing their own thing, and God would have to discipline them and punish them to bring them back. And they were fighting against it and then would repent and realize we really can't do this on our own. And so it was during the reign of the judges again before the kings. There was a cycle of oppression and obedience in the land, and so it wasn't a super fun time. As we heard, there was a famine. That famine, potentially a disciplinary action by God to wake his people up to come back to him and to return from him. And then the famine is over, and then the people who were in Moab returned back. All right. Number 5, what was Ruth's husband's name? We've answered that. Her husband was Mahlon. Her mother-in-law's name was Naomi, and her sister-in-law's name was Orpah. So that one's a quick one. We've already gone over that. Number 6, what genre of literature is the book of Ruth and what literary form? So we've talked about this many times. Genre. We've gone over different types of genres of scripture. We've talked about epistles and what those are. We've talked about prophecy. This is a different one that we haven't really gone over too much, but it is narrative. That is the genre of this. We actually would call it historical narrative because it is about events in history that actually happened. And so when this historical narrative is being recorded, it is in what kind of writing style? And that is not poetry. It is prose. So I think we talked about with Habakkuk, it is mostly written in prose, which is like paragraph form. But there are some little sections of it that are in poetry, or maybe I think I'm switching that. It's mostly poetry and some of it's in prose. But Ruth is all in prose. There are times that Ruth is speaking that it sounds poetic language, like even in chapter 1 where she's talking to Naomi, it sounds very sing-songy. I mean, we took the verses from that and made it a worship song that we sing in church. So there you go. But it is actually prose. So it is historical narrative is the genre of literature and prose. Please pay attention. Oh my goodness. I should not do that. Please pay attention to this. You guys know that is something that will show up on a test. So, All right, number 7. What is one of the biggest themes found in the book of Ruth and why? So I mentioned this before. Faithfulness and loyalty is the biggest one for that. Ruth remains true to Naomi and then true to her mother-in-law's God, the God that she has found to be God for her life as well. We see some themes of faithfulness that we'll see later in the book. I don't want to get too ahead of us and give some spoilers. I'm sure many of you have read the book of Ruth or heard of the book of Ruth before. But we do see a lot of faithfulness within family, which is another theme of this book. Not just family like blood, but family with the family of God and what it looks like to selflessly care for one another, even when you might not be getting something out of it yourself, and then seeing God's provision for us when we choose to lay down our lives for others, even in ways that might seem weird or odd or inconvenient for us. So those are two of the biggest themes in that. Ruth does lose a large part of her family, but then she gains it back, and so does Naomi, and we'll see that at the end of the book. Number 8, I asked you to read the first chapter of the book of Ruth, and then you had some questions. But in order to not make this video too long, this is just going over the questions I asked you to look up yourself. I will be filming another video that will be uploaded for you probably on Tuesday. Monday, your silence project is due. On Tuesday for you to go over and make notes, essentially in your digital journals that you will then submit to me on Schoology. Taking notes on the questions that you guys asked about the first chapter of Ruth in your assignments for today. So that is what I have for today, and I hope that you guys were able to follow along. This video will be, I think it stays on the stream. If not, then I will upload it to my channel. So right now it's a live stream, then it will be uploaded. If you have questions, you can email me, you can put it in the comments, you can post on our school, on our classes Schoology area in your Schoology. So whatever works for you, I will respond to you, and I hope this video was helpful. Watch as many times as you need to get your notes, and then don't forget to submit your notes back before Monday 9 a.m. That's how long you have until these notes are due. So, and don't forget to submit your silence projects, which are due at 3 p.m. You are welcome. All right, that's what I got. Thanks, guys.